They left him with a wounded alien girl no one wanted, the human who changed her future forever. Bren Calloway had lived alone on Cassandra's Reach for 6 years, and in that time he had learned exactly one unbreakable rule about the transport crews that used his relay pad as a waypoint. They never stayed longer than they had to, and they never explained themselves. So when the Hallow run a battered mid-haul freighter with a compact registry number, half scoured off its hull by ice static, dropped out of the low-orbit lane 3 hours ahead of a storm front, and requested an emergency pad clearance, Bren didn't think much of it beyond the storm math. Wind shear was building along the eastern ridge. If the ship didn't set down in the next 40 minutes, it would be riding out the front in vacuum, and that was a bad way to lose a crew. He cleared the pad, killed the perimeter lights so the ship's own floods could guide it in, and stood in the doorway of his cabin with his coat half-buttoned, watching the freighter come down crooked and hard on its rear skids, kicking up a wall of ice dust that took a full minute to settle. The cargo ramp dropped before the engines had finished cycling down. 2 crew members came down it fast, half carrying, half dragging something between them, a shape wrapped in a thermal tarp, limp in the way that made Bren's stomach drop before his mind caught up to what he was looking at. They didn't slow as they crossed the pad toward him. They didn't ask if they could. They simply set the bundle down at the edge of his porch stairs, straightened, and looked at him with the particular blankness of people who had already decided the conversation was over. "You'll want to get her inside before the wind picks up," the older one said. Human, compact merchant guild patch on his shoulder, eyes that wouldn't hold Bren's for more than a second at a time. "She's stable, wounds clean, dressed 12 hours ago. She'll need more than we can give her out here." "Who is she?" Bren said. Not a question so much as a demand for the ship not to leave until he had an answer. "Ithrin," the man said, like that explained something. "Picked her up off a debt marker 2 systems back. He stopped. Glanced at his younger crewmate who was already retreating up the ramp without a word. "She's marked, is what she is. Keith Sorn, you know what that means?" "No." "Means nobody with a compact contract touches her without inheriting whatever debt she's carrying. Nobody on my crew's manifest is authorized to be caring for a marked exile, and I've got 6 more stops before I can risk the paperwork catching up to me. You're independent, off manifest. You can do what you want out here." He was already backing toward the ramp. "Storm's coming in fast. You want her, she's yours. You don't, leave her on the pad, and I won't tell anyone you didn't." "That's not," Bren started, but the ramp was already retracting, and 30 seconds later the Hallow run S engines screamed back to full burn, and the freighter clawed itself up off the ice and was gone into the gray. Running from the storm it had nearly died in rather than spend 1 more hour on the ground. Bren stood there in the wind for a long moment, looking down at the shape at the base of his stairs. Then he crouched, pulled back the edge of the tarp, and found himself looking at a face he had no context for and would not forget. She was Ithrin. He knew that much just from the coloring, the faint frost-pale sheen along her cheekbones like something between skin and hoarfrost, the deep blue-white of her, eyes closed, dark hair matted with ice and old blood at one temple. Young, or young the way all of them looked young to him, though something about the set of her jaw, even unconscious, suggested she'd earned whatever years she had the hard way. A field dressing was wrapped tight across her ribs and one shoulder, soaked through in a dark stain that had frozen at the edges. Her lips had gone the color of the ice around her. She was not going to survive the night out here. Bren didn't waste time being angry at a ship that was already 3 kilometers up and climbing. He got his arms under her. She weighed less than he expected, dangerously less, and carried her inside out of the wind and laid her down on the cot by the stove. And by the time the storm hit the Reach in full an hour later, howling against the shutters hard enough to rattle the frame, he had already cut away the ruined dressing and was looking at a wound that told him more than any crew member had bothered to. It wasn't an accident. Someone had put a blade into her, high and hard, meant to kill and only failing because whoever did it had been rushed, or she had moved at the last second, or both. The wound had been stitched since, crudely, by someone without real field training, probably one of the freighter crew doing the bare minimum to keep her breathing, until they could offload the problem onto someone else. Bren had spent 6 years managing predator populations and doing his own trauma triage when the nearest real medical station was 4 days out by supply run. He knew what he was looking at. He got to work. She didn't wake until near dawn, and when she did, it was without warning. No stirring, no slow surfacing. One moment she was still under the blanket he'd piled over her, and the next her eyes were open, ice pale and sharp, and locked on him with a wariness that had nothing sluggish in it at all, like whatever had put her under hadn't touched the part of her that was still counting exits. "You're not going to be able to run anywhere for a few days," Bren said, keeping his hands visible and his voice level, the same register he used on wounded animals he needed to not spook. "Wound's deep. I've got it closed, but it'll pull if you move wrong." She said nothing. Her gaze went to the window, the door, the stove, the single other exit through the equipment room, cataloging fast, the way someone did when they'd learned the hard way that safety was never assumed, only mapped. "You're on Cassandra's Reach," he said. "Independent relay and wildlife post. No compact garrison, no port authority, nobody keeping a manifest on who comes through. Storm's got us locked in for 2 more days at least." He paused. "Your crew left you, didn't seem broken up about it." Something moved behind her eyes at that, not surprise. Confirmation, maybe. Like she'd expected it and it had happened anyway, and both of those things could be true at once. "You know my designation," she said. Her voice was rough with disuse and cold, but the standard was clean, careful, a second language worn smooth by long practice. "Keith Zorn." "I was told what it means for cargo manifests. I wasn't told what it means for you." "It means," she said, and there was something braced in the way she said it, like she was waiting for his face to change, "that I am marked, that my clan has cast me out and named me a debt no one may shelter without inheriting it, that any decent person who learns what I am should put me back outside." A pause. "You should put me back outside." "I'm not going to do that." "You don't know what I did." "No," Bren agreed. "I know what somebody did to you, though, and that wasn't a fair fight." He nodded at the wound. "Whatever you did, I doubt it earned you a blade in the ribs from behind, which is where that entry angle says it came from." She didn't answer that. Her jaw tightened, and her eyes went distant in a way that told him he'd hit something true without meaning to aim for it. And then the fever that had been building under her skin for hours finally caught up to her, and she went under again before she could decide whether to be grateful or afraid. The storm kept them both inside for 3 days, and in that time Bren learned the practical shape of her, without learning much of the story underneath it. Her name, when she finally offered it on the second morning, was Vesa. No clan name attached. Outcasts didn't carry those, she told him flatly, the way you'd state a fact about weather. She was Vithra by birth. She was nothing by decree. She ate what he gave her without complaint, though he noticed she counted the portions, watching how much he took for himself before she'd eat the same or less, like she was calibrating whether this was a kindness with a hidden cost or one that would run out. She slept in short, alert stretches even with the fever burning through her, waking at small sounds, the stove settling, wind changing pitch against the shutters, faster than anyone with a wound that deep should have been able to. She was, Bren came to understand without being told outright, someone who had been running for a long time before that blade found her, and someone whose body had not yet caught up to the idea that she might, for a few days, be allowed to stop. On the 3rd day, with the storm beginning to thin and the wound closing clean under the dressing changes he did twice a day without ceremony, she asked him why. "Why what?" he said, though he knew. "Why you did not put me back outside. The freighter crew told you what I am. Any station chief in compact space would have logged my designation and left me on the pad for the next patrol to collect. You did not do that. Bren considered the question honestly before he answered it, because she seemed like someone who would know if he didn't. I spend most of my time out here managing animal populations that don't ask my permission to be hurt or hungry or dying, he said. You learn pretty fast that most things worth doing right don't come with a clean explanation of who deserves it and who doesn't. Somebody put a knife in you, and then a ship full of people who could have helped decided the paperwork mattered more than whether you lived. That's the only part of this I needed to understand. She was quiet for a long moment, looking at him with an expression he couldn't read yet. Wouldn't be able to read for weeks. He'd learn later, because Ithran faces carried weight in places human faces didn't, in the set of the jaw and the stillness of the throat more than the eyes. That is either the simplest reasoning I have ever heard, she said finally, or the most dangerous. Could be both, Bren said, and went back to checking the dressing and didn't ask the questions crowding behind his teeth. What she'd done, who had marked her, who had put the blade in her back. He'd learned that too out here. Some things you didn't pull loose before a person was ready to hand them to you themselves. Word travels strangely on a moon with a population of 11, and it took less than a week for Iris Cade, station chief of Havern Relay, 40 kilometers south along the ridge, and the closest thing Cassandra's reach had to civic authority, to make the trek out on a snow crawler with a face that told Bren she already knew. Tell me the asterisk Hallow Run didn't leave a Keith Sorn marker on your porch, she said, before she'd even fully dismounted. Didn't have much say in it, Bren said. Iris swore, long and thorough, in a way that suggested this wasn't news to her so much as confirmation of a fear. Bren, you understand what that mark means. It's not a paperwork inconvenience. It's a formal clan debt designation. Someone somewhere holds a claim on that woman that her own people have decided outweighs her right to exist among them. Ithran clans don't do that casually. Whatever she's carrying, it's blood serious, and the moment word gets back to whichever clan issued the mark that she's alive and sheltered, you become collateral in a debt you had nothing to do with. She's healing, Bren said. I'm not putting a healing person back out on the ice because a shipping manifest says I should. I'm not telling you to put her out on the ice, Iris said, softer now, some of the fight going out of her because she'd known him 6 years and knew arguing that particular point with him was a waste of breath. I'm telling you to understand what you're standing next to. If her marker's active, someone's tracking it. Might be months before anyone comes looking this far out. Might be sooner. I need you to know that going in, not find it out the hard way. Bren looked back toward the cabin, where Vesa was visible through the window, sitting up now, watching the exchange with the particular stillness of someone pretending not to listen while listening entirely. I know, he said. Do you? Iris said, not unkindly. Because from where I'm standing, you look like a man who already decided this before he had all the facts, and I've known you long enough to know that once you decide something, moving you off it is a season's work. She wasn't wrong, and Bren didn't pretend otherwise. But he also didn't change his answer, and after another minute of studying his face, Iris let out a breath, shook her head, and said she'd flagged the relay logs quietly. No formal report, nothing that would ping a compact system, just her own eyes kept a little more open on the incoming traffic, and left it at that, because that was the kind of station chief she was, and the kind of moon this was, where people mostly minded their own survival and let their neighbors mind theirs. Vesa didn't say anything about the conversation until that evening, when Bren was banking the stove for the night. She is right to be afraid for you, Vesa said from the cot, in the tone of someone stating a fact she'd rather not have to state. You should listen to her. I heard her fine. Hearing and listening are not the same action, human. Bren almost smiled at the particular dry precision of it. Fair, he said. But I've got 6 years of watching things try to survive out here on their own terms, and I've never once seen it go better for anybody, when the answer was asterisk, push them back out because it's safer for me. So I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing, and you're going to keep healing. And if a problem shows up on my porch because of it, I'll deal with the problem when it's actually a problem instead of borrowing trouble off a marker I don't understand yet. Vesa watched him for a long moment, the firelight catching the frost-pale sheen along her cheekbones, and something in her expression shifted. Not quite trust, not yet, but the visible beginning of a question she wasn't ready to ask him. Why does this keep being true of you? You are either very brave, she said finally, echoing her own words from days before, or very foolish. You said that already. I am reconsidering my answer. The weeks that followed built themselves into a shape neither of them had planned for. Vesa healed faster than Bren expected, and once she was steady on her feet, she did not sit idle. She couldn't. He came to understand, not because he asked anything of her, but because stillness without purpose seemed to cost her something she wasn't willing to pay. She started small, mending gear, then organizing his poorly kept supply shelves with a precision that bordered on surgical. Then, once he grudgingly admitted she had better balance on ice than he'd ever had, joining him on the trapline rounds that made up the bulk of his contract work, tracking predator movement across the compact's protected wildlife corridor, and keeping the local megafauna from wandering into the relay pad's traffic lanes. She was good at it, better than good. She read snow the way Bren read weather fronts, could tell him from a partial print whether a track was 6 hours old or two, could move across broken ice with a silence he'd spent years trying and failing to learn himself. He asked her once, half joking, where she'd learned it. I was a huntress before I was a mark, she said simply, and didn't elaborate, and he didn't push. What he did learn in pieces, over weeks of quiet evenings and long silent walks along the ridge, was the shape of her world without yet the reason she'd been cast out of it. She was Vithra clan, ice hunters and record keepers on a homeworld 3 jumps distant, a people organized around debt and honor in ways that made human contract law look loose and sentimental by comparison. She had a sister, younger, she said, and then closed her mouth like she'd let more out than intended. She had been considered, before whatever happened, one of the clan's better hunters, trusted with the winter culls that kept her people fed through the long dark. And she had, at some point Bren still didn't have the details of, done something that had gotten her marked Keith Sorn, stripped of clan name, formally disowned, made untouchable under a debt designation so severe that a merchant crew 2 systems away had been willing to abandon a wounded woman on a stranger's porch rather than risk inheriting it. He didn't ask directly. He'd learned, watching her, that direct questions made her retreat, not into anger but into a careful blankness, the same stillness she'd worn the first morning she woke on his cot mapping exits. So instead he waited and worked alongside her, and let the trust build the slow way, one unremarkable day at a time, the way it actually built instead of the way people wished it did. That trust nearly cost them both something, in the 5th week, in a way that Bren thought about often afterward. They had gone out past the eastern markers to track a game population the compact survey wanted counted before the season turned. Nothing unusual. A routine 2-day circuit he'd walked alone a dozen times before. When the ice under a shelf they'd crossed 100 times without incident gave way beneath Vesa's second footfall instead of his first, the fracture running out sideways under the snow cover in a pattern neither of them could have predicted from the surface. She went down hard into black water so cold it stopped thought before it stopped breath, and Bren was already moving before his mind had finished registering what had happened, flat on his stomach on the good ice, reaching, shouting her name in a voice that didn't sound like his own. She didn't panic. That was the thing he remembered most clearly afterward, turning it over on quiet nights, even with the cold locking her muscles and the current beneath the shelf pulling at her boots. She kept her head above the brake, kept her hands moving with a huntress's economy toward the edge he'd reached toward her, and when his grip finally closed around her wrist, she didn't grab back wildly the way panic would have made her. She helped him pull. Even half frozen and fighting a current, she did the math of the rescue alongside him instead of against him, kicking when he needed her weight lighter, going still when he needed her weight to anchor, until they were both back from the edge, soaked and shaking, well clear of the fracture line. He got a fire going faster than he'd ever managed one in 6 years on the reach, stripped her out of the frozen outer layers with hands too numb to be gentle about it, wrapped her in every dry thing the emergency kit carried, and held her against him under the thermal blanket while the shivering ran its worst course through her, neither of them speaking, because there was nothing efficient to say and both of them knew it. It was a long while before her voice came back steady enough to use. "You should not have reached for me on unstable ice," she said, teeth still chattering faintly around the words. "If the fracture had spread beneath you as well, we would both have gone under, and there would have been no one left on the surface to pull either of us out." "Didn't have time to run the math," Bren said. "Wasn't going to lie there and watch." "That is not a plan, that is instinct. Been keeping me alive out here longer than a plan usually does." She was quiet for a while after that, her head resting against his shoulder in a way that felt less like exhaustion and more like a decision, deliberate. The first time she had let her guard down around him in a manner that had nothing to do with fever or cold forcing it out of her. "On my homeworld," she said eventually, "no one reaches for a hunter on cracking ice. It is understood, if the ice takes you, the ice takes you, and a second life is not risked to argue with it. It is considered wisdom, not cruelty. I have always believed it wisdom. And now I am less certain what I believe," she admitted, "except that I am glad tonight that you did not know that particular piece of wisdom or did not care to practice it." It was on a night in the 7th week, with a smaller storm rattling the shutters and the two of them sitting either side of the stove after a long cold day, resetting a line of perimeter markers that a young ice serpent had trampled, that she finally told him. "You want to know what I did," she said, not a question. "I want to know when you're ready to tell me. Those aren't the same thing." "They are tonight." She was quiet for a moment, hands wrapped around a cup of the bitter tea she'd developed a taste for, staring into the stove's glow rather than at him. "My sister's name is Lisette. She is 4 years younger than I am, and she was never made for the hunt. She has a gift for growing things, for coaxing food out of ground that should not give it, which our people value nearly as much as they value the hunt itself, but differently. Softer. A breath. 2 winters ago, our clan incurred a blood debt to the Osirin, a rival clan, harder than ours, colder in the ways that matter. A hunt gone wrong. Deaths on their side that our clan elders judged partly our fault, under our law. The debt required a life bonded into Osirin service to balance it. Not death. Something the Osirin considered mercy in their own accounting. A permanent servitude bond, blood-marked, no release clause, no appeal. Bren said nothing, letting her find the rest of it at her own pace. "The elders chose Lisette," Vesa said, and her voice, for the first time since he'd known her, lost its careful evenness. She was the youngest unbonded daughter of a family withstanding enough to satisfy the Osirin's pride. She was 17. She had never held a blade in anger in her life, and they were going to hand her to a clan that considered a growing gift no different from a hunting one when it came to what use they'd put a bonded servant to. Her jaw tightened. "I refused the elders' judgment. Publicly, in full council, which is not done. You do not contest a debt ruling once the elders have spoken, not without offering an alternative the council will accept." "What alternative did you offer?" "Myself," Vesa said. "I told them to send me instead. I am the elder sister, the hunter, the one whose absence would cost the clan less, and whose service the Osirin would find more useful in the ways that mattered to them." A humorless breath, almost a laugh. "The council refused, said a hunter's value to the clan outweighed a farmer's, that Lisette was the correct payment, and I was overstepping every boundary a daughter is permitted. I refused to accept that answer. I went to the Osirin envoy directly, before the formal bonding ceremony, and made the offer myself, Clan council be damned. Myself in her place, my service instead of hers. And they took it. They took it, Vesa confirmed. The envoy did not care which daughter he brought home, only that the debt was balanced by a body of comparable standing, and I made certain mine qualified. Lisette is safe. She remains with our clan, unbonded, free to grow whatever she wishes to grow. She looked up at him then, and there was something raw in her expression that he hadn't seen before, not even in the fever days after the storm. But I defied the council's ruling in open session and offered myself to a rival clan without their sanction, and that, regardless of the outcome, regardless of Lisette's safety, is a transgression our law does not forgive. The elders declared me Keith Sorn, cast out, my name struck from the clan record. And because the Ossaran envoy considered a hunter who would defy her own council to be more trouble than the debt was worth, he refused the substitution after all, once it became clear it would cost him standing with my clan's elders to accept a disowned exile as payment. He took nothing. Lisette remains unbonded and unclaimed. The debt remains unpaid. And I. She stopped. Bren waited. I remain marked for a debt that was never even collected, she said quietly. Cast out for an offer that was refused. My clan considers me a stain on their honor for having tried, whether or not it succeeded. The Ossaran consider me an insult for having offered myself uninvited. I belong now to neither. That is what Keith Sorn means in the end. Not that I owe a debt, that I tried to pay one that was never mine to pay in a way no one sanctioned, and the attempt itself was the crime. The stove crackled in the silence that followed. Bren sat with what she'd told him for a long moment, turning it over, feeling something settle in his chest that he recognized, distantly, as the particular kind of anger that didn't need to be loud to be real. That's not a crime, he said finally. That's the only decent thing anybody in that whole story did. It does not matter what it is, Vesa said. It matters what my people ruled it to be. Rulings aren't the same as truth. I've spent 6 years out here learning that particular lesson the hard way, watching compact contracts declare things true that anybody standing on this ice could see plain weren't. He met her eyes. You put yourself between your sister and something ugly, and it cost you everything, and the people who should have called that courage called it a crime instead. That's on them. Not you. Something in her face moved at that. Not tears. Ithran physiology didn't seem to work that way, but something adjacent, a tightness around the eyes that hadn't been there a moment before, and she looked away into the stove's light for a long moment before she trusted her voice again. No one has said that to me, she said quietly, since it happened. Not even Lisette. She is grateful, I know she is grateful, but she has never once said the word *courage to me. Only *sorry*. Then I'm saying it, plainly, so there's no mistaking it. Bren held her gaze. What you did was brave. What happened after wasn't fair. Both of those things are true, and neither one changes because a council somewhere ruled otherwise. Vesa didn't answer that in words. She simply sat with it in the firelight for a long time, and something between them settled that night that neither of them named out loud, but both understood had changed. Later, when the fire had burned low and she'd retreated to the cot out of habit more than need, she spoke once more into the dark, quietly enough that he almost missed it. For 2 years I have told myself the story my clan told about me, she said. That I was reckless, prideful, that I mistook defiance for love and called it something nobler than it was. It becomes easier after long enough to believe the version other people hand you, because at least it explains why the loss happened. It gives the loss a shape you caused, instead of a shape that simply happened to you. A pause, the dark between them full of the stove's dying tick. Tonight is the first time in 2 years I have said the whole truth aloud to another person, and the ground did not open beneath me for it. I did not expect that to matter as much as it does. It's not nothing, Bren said, from his own side of the room. Saying a true thing out loud to somebody who isn't going to flinch from it, takes the weight off in a way that carrying it alone never does. No, Vesa agreed, and he heard in the single syllable something loosen in her that had been held tight since long before the blade ever found her ribs. It does not. The trouble Iris had warned him about arrived in the 9th week, on a clear cold morning, with the kind of visibility that made the ridge line look close enough to touch. Bren was resetting a marker post when the comm crackled Iris, her voice tight in a way he'd never heard from her before. Bren, you need to get back to the cabin, now. I've got an unregistered ship inbound on the southern approach, small, fast, running Ithran transponder codes with the ident stripped. It's not asking clearance. It's not slowing down. He was already moving, Vesa a half step behind him, both of them reading the same conclusion in the same silence. Siren, Vesa said, once they'd covered half the distance back at a dead run, or Vithra. Either would send a fast retrieval craft rather than a formal envoy, if word reached them that I was alive and sheltered. Her voice was flat, controlled, the huntresscom he'd come to recognize as her way of holding fear at arm's length rather than the absence of it. If it is Siren, they come to claim the debt after all, now that they know I survive, and that a witness clan or the compact might learn the debt when unpaid, which damages their standing as much as mine. If it is Vithra, they come to finish what the marking was meant to accomplish. Either way, they do not come to talk. They reached the cabin with less than 10 minutes before the ship would be on top of them. Bren pulled his rifle down from the rack by habit more than plan, predator deterrent, not built for this. But it was what he had, and found Vesa already at the equipment room, pulling on the cold weather gear with the fast, economical movements of someone who had done this kind of preparation before, many times, in circumstances he hoped never to fully understand. You should not be here for this, she said, not looking at him, checking a blade she'd apparently kept hidden in her boot since the day she arrived and he'd never once noticed. Whatever debt they come to collect, it is mine. If you stand beside me, you become part of the claim, and I have already cost one person everything I could take from them. I will not take you as well. You're not taking anything, Bren said. I'm choosing this. There's a difference, and you know it, because it's the exact difference you tried to explain to your own council 2 years ago, and they didn't listen. That landed. He saw it land, saw something crack across her carefully held composure, just for a second before she forced it back down. You do not know what you are choosing. I know a ship's coming to take you somewhere you don't want to go, and I know what happens to people who stand between somebody and the thing they want if that somebody's got enough force behind them and no reason to hold back. I've watched it happen to animals out here more times than I can count. I'm not watching it happen to you because I got squeamish about a paperwork designation. The ship came down hard on the pad, no ceremony, and the 2 figures that came off it moved with a purposeful economy that told Bren everything he needed to know about how this was meant to go. Fast, quiet, no witnesses. Done before anyone at Havern Station, 40 kilometers south, could mobilize a response. The lead figure was Ithran, tall, dark-plated in something between armor and formal clan dress. A weapon at his hip he wore like it was as natural as a hand. He stopped at the base of the porch stairs. The same spot, Bren registered with a cold, distant clarity, where Vesa had been left 3 months before, and looked up at the 2 of them standing in the doorway with an expression of pure, uncomplicated inconvenience. Keith Sorn Vithra, the man said, in accented but functional standard, addressing Vesa directly and pointedly, not acknowledging Bren's existence at all. I am Torv of the Siren Envoy House. You are aware of your designation and its terms. I am here to correct an oversight. There is no debt to correct, Vesa said, her voice level, huntress flat. Your envoy refused the substitution. The debt was never collected. You have no claim. The debt was never formally *discharged, Torv corrected. My father's envoy declined a disowned exile as payment 2 years ago, out of concern for the standing cost of accepting a spoiled offer. Circumstances have changed. Word has reached the Ossaran Council that the Vithra debt remains unresolved in the eyes of neutral witness clans, and that reflects poorly on my house's judgment as much as yours. My father has authorized me to correct that. You will accompany me. The bond will be formalized properly this time, with full council witness, and the matter will be closed on terms that satisfy Ossaran honor. And if I refuse? Torv's expression didn't change, which was somehow worse than if it had. You are Keith Sorn. You have no clan standing to refuse anything. That protection ended the day the elders struck your name. His gaze flicked, finally, dismissively to Bren. This is not your concern, human. Step aside. She's not going anywhere she doesn't choose to go, Bren said. You do not understand what you are involving yourself in. I understand plenty. I understand you're here to drag off a woman who offered herself up to save her sister 2 years ago and got punished for it by everyone with the power to punish her. And now, you want to finish the job because it's embarrassing for your father's standing that you didn't manage to collect the first time. That's not honor. That's paperwork with a knife attached. Something shifted in Torv's stance, not quite alarm, but recalculation, the look of a man who had expected this to be simple and was realizing it might not be. This is compact monitored space, he said, a warning edge creeping into his voice. I am not authorized to use force against a compact citizen. Good, Bren said. Then we're at an impasse because I'm not authorized to let you take her, and I don't plan on changing that. For a long taut moment, nobody moved. Bren could feel Vesa beside him, tense as a drawn line, and he understood without needing to look that she was calculating the same thing he was, that Torv had come for a quick, quiet extraction, not a standoff with witnesses, and that every minute this dragged out increased the odds that Iris, 40 kilometers south, was already burning fuel getting a response together. It was Vesa who broke the silence, and when she spoke, her voice had changed. No longer flat with fear held at bay, but something harder, colder, the voice Bren imagined she'd used the day she stood in her clan's council chamber and told them to send her instead. You say I have no standing to refuse, she said to Torv. Then let us test that claim before a witness who is not bound by either of our clan's law. Compact Registry logs every unregistered ship transponder that enters this system. Station Chief Iris Cade is already tracking your approach, and by the time you attempt to force me aboard that ship, there will be a formal compact incident record generated whether you like it or not. A record that will show an Ossaran envoy vessel attempting to forcibly remove a sheltered individual from a compact monitored settlement against her stated will. Your father sent you to correct an embarrassment Torv. Explain to me how a formal compact incident report improves his standing more than an unresolved debt does. Torv's jaw tightened. Bren watched the math happen behind the man's eyes, watched him weigh the mission against the cost, and understood in that moment that Vesa had just done exactly what she'd done 2 years ago in her own council chamber. Found the one lever nobody expected her to find and pulled it without flinching. This is not finished, Torv said finally, each word clipped tight with the particular fury of a man forced to retreat from something he'd been certain was simple. My father will hear of this. The debt remains open. I will return with proper authorization. Return with whatever you like, Vesa said. But you will find, when you do, that the debt was never yours to reopen in the first place, and I intend to make certain of that before you get the chance to try again. Torv held her gaze a moment longer, some old, complicated thing passing between two people who had once nearly bound their houses together, and now stood as close to enemies as clan law allowed without open blood feud. Then he turned, boarded his ship without another word, and was gone into the gray within minutes, the same way the Hallow Run had fled the storm 3 months before, fast, and without looking back. Bren let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Beside him, Vessa's shoulders dropped a fraction, the huntress' stillness cracking just enough to let something exhausted and human, or the Ithran equivalent of it, show through. "You should not have stood there," she said quietly, once the ship's engine trail had faded from the sky. "If he had chosen violence instead of retreat." "He didn't." "He might have." "Might have," Bren agreed. "Didn't. And if he had, you'd have found out I'm a better shot than I look and we'd have had a different conversation. But that's not the conversation we're having, so let's not borrow it." He looked at her steady. "You did that. Found the exact right thing to say to make him back down without either of us needing to force it." "That wasn't luck." "It was the same thing I did in the council chamber," Vessa said, and there was something almost wondering in her voice, like she was only now hearing the echo of it herself. "Find the true weight of the thing they actually value, and hold it up where they cannot pretend not to see it." "Worked twice now," Bren said. "Might be worth trusting it a third time if it comes to that." It came to that sooner than either of them expected, and in a form neither had anticipated. Iris arrived within the hour, Snowcrawler pushed to its limits, and by the time she'd heard the full account of what had happened, her expression had shifted from alarm to something calculating and sharp. "You said he claimed the debt was never formally discharged," Iris said to Vessa. "That the failure to complete the substitution is what's kept your marker active this whole time." "That is correct." "Then here's what I'm thinking," Iris said. "Compact Registry doesn't recognize Ithran clan debt law directly, but it does recognize formal witness declarations in interspecies dispute mediation, and I happen to be a certified neutral registrar for exactly that purpose out here, which is a fact most people who use this relay conveniently forget I hold. If you're willing to give a full, recorded account, what actually happened in that council chamber, what you offered, why the Ossaran envoy refused it, all of it, I can log it as a formal witness statement. It won't override Vithra clan law. But it will exist, permanently, in a compact record any neutral party can access, showing exactly what happened and why. Word travels between clans faster than people like to admit, especially when it makes an envoy look bad for refusing an honorable offer out of pride. Ossaran House standing took a hit today just from you invoking the possibility of an incident report. A formal witnessed account of the original offer, the whole truth of it on record, permanently, might do a great deal more than that." Vessa was quiet for a long moment, and Bren watched something shift behind her eyes, not the huntress calculation from the standoff, but something more careful, more hopeful, the particular fragile hope of someone who had stopped expecting good outcomes to be real options. "You would do this for me," she said, "a Keith Sorn." "I do it for anyone who asked and had a true account to give," Iris said. "The designation doesn't mean anything under compact law, never has. It's your clan's business until it becomes somebody trying to drag a person off a compact settlement against her will, and then it becomes mine." It took the better part of a day to record the full statement carefully, with Iris asking the precise questions that would make the account unimpeachable. Dates. Witnesses in the original council chamber who could theoretically be reached to corroborate. The exact wording of the elder's ruling. The exact terms of Vessa's offer. The Ossaran envoy's exact reason for refusal. By the end of it, Vessa looked wrung out in a way the physical wound 3 months prior had never quite managed. But there was something else in her face too, something that looked, to Bren's eye, almost like relief. The particular relief of finally being permitted to tell the true version of a story instead of carrying the false one alone. The formal record went into the compact interspecies mediation archive 2 days later, cross-flagged, per standard procedure, to any registered clan authority with an active interest in the parties named, which included, Iris confirmed with grim satisfaction, both the Ossaran envoy house and the Vithra clan elders themselves. It took another 11 days for the response to come. It arrived not as a ship, but as a formal transmission relayed through Havern Station's registry system, a full council communication from Vithra clan, addressed not to Vessa's exile designation, but, for the first time in 2 years, to her name. Bren was there when Vessa read it, standing at the window with the transmission pad in her hands, and he watched her go very still. The particular stillness he'd learned meant something enormous was happening beneath the surface. Not the absence of feeling, but the sheer weight of too much of it arriving at once. "They are reviewing the marking," she said finally, her voice unsteady in a way he had never heard from her. The formal witness statement reached the council through neutral compact channels, unimpeachable, they say, in a way testimony from within the clan itself could never have been, because it could not be dismissed as a disowned exile's self-serving account. "2 of the elders who voted to mark me have requested a formal reconsideration hearing. They say," she stopped, and had to start again. "They say the record makes plain what the original council refused to see. That I did not defy their ruling out of pride or disobedience. That I offered myself in true substitution, honorably, and was denied only because the Ossaran envoy valued his own house's pride over accepting an honest exchange. They say that is not the behavior the Keithsorn marking was designed to punish. So they're lifting it. They have not lifted it yet. They have opened the possibility." But her hands were shaking faintly around the transmission pad, and when she looked up at him, something had broken open in her expression that 3 months of careful watchfulness had never once let through. "Lisette sent a private message beneath the formal one. She says," Vessa's voice caught, "she says she never stopped arguing my case in council, every season since it happened, and that no one would listen until a stranger with no clan stake in any of it made the truth impossible to ignore. She says she has never once believed I did anything but the bravest thing anyone in our family has done in 3 generations, and that she is ashamed. It took an outsider's witness to make the elders finally hear it." Bren said nothing for a moment, watching her absorb the full weight of it. 2 years of being told, by the people who should have known her best, that she was a stain to be struck from the record. And now, finally, the beginning of a different accounting. "Your future was never what they decided in that room 2 years ago," he said quietly. "It was just what they'd managed to convince you to believe, because nobody said different loud enough for long enough. That's changing now, not because I did anything special. Because the truth finally got somewhere it couldn't be talked around." The formal reconsideration hearing was held 6 weeks later. Not in person. Vessa still too far, and the risk still too real to travel to her homeworld directly, but by full council transmission, with Iris standing as certified neutral compact witness and Bren present at Vessa's insistence, silent in the corner of the small relay office, because she said she wanted at least one person in the room who had seen the truth of her without needing a formal record to prove it first. The hearing lasted 4 hours. Bren understood perhaps a third of the ceremonial Ithran law language, but he understood the shape of it well enough. Elder after elder speaking to the record Iris had witnessed, the account of the council chamber offer laid bare beside the account of the Ossaran refusal, the plain, undeniable math of what Vessa had actually done set against what she had been punished for 2 years believing it was. The ruling, when it came, was unanimous. The Keithsorn marking was struck. Vessa Vithra's clan name was restored to the record, with a formal notation. Rare, Iris told him afterward, rarer than almost anything in Ithran legal tradition, acknowledging that the original marking had been an error of judgment by the council that issued it, and that the intervening 2 years of exile had been, in the elder's own recorded words, a debt owed to her, not by her, which the clan now formally recognizes and cannot fully repay but will not compound further. Vessa did not cry, not in any way Bren's eyes could register as crying, but she sat very still for a long time after the transmission ended, her hands folded in her lap, staring at nothing, and when she finally spoke, her voice was thick with something that needed no translation. "I do not know what to do with this," she admitted. I have spent 2 years learning how to be no one. I do not remember how to be someone again. You don't have to figure that out today, Bren said. You've got time now. That's the whole point of what just happened. You've got a future that isn't already decided for you by somebody else's ruling. Whatever you do with it is allowed to take as long as it takes. She looked at him then, really looked, the way she had that first fevered morning on his cot, except everything underneath the look had changed. My clan has formally invited me to return, she said. Lisette has already sent 3 messages asking when I will come. I could go home tomorrow, restored with standing with my name. You could, Bren agreed, and made himself say it plainly, because she deserved plainness more than he deserved comfort. That's yours to choose. Nobody's holding a debt over you anymore, including me. I know, Vesa said. That is why I am telling you rather than simply going that I do not think I want to leave yet, perhaps not for a long while. A faint, unfamiliar softness crossed her face, something he'd never seen there before, not through fever or grief or the cold calculation of a standoff. I have spent this season learning what it is to be sheltered by someone who asked nothing of me in return, who called what I did courage before he even knew the whole shape of it, and who stood on those stairs with me when it would have cost him everything to walk away instead. I find I am not finished learning what that is yet, and Lisette understands. She has told me herself that a life chosen freely is worth more to her than a sister returned on obligation. Bren felt something in his chest loosen that he hadn't realized had been held tight for months, since the storm, since the ramp dropping and 2 strangers setting a wounded, unwanted woman down on his porch stairs like a debt nobody wanted to carry. Then stay as long as you want, he said. The reach isn't going anywhere. Neither am I. Spring on Cassandra's reach came late and grudging, the ice retreating from the ridgeline in slow, reluctant sheets, and by the time the first true thaw opened the southern pass, Vesa had made the cabin as much hers as his, her own gear on the racks beside his, her own careful order imposed on shelves that had needed it for 6 years, her own quiet, steady presence in the doorway each morning when he came in off the early rounds. Lisette visited that summer, the first time in 2 years she and Vesa had stood in the same room, and Bren watched the 2 of them from a careful distance, giving them the space they needed, as a younger, softer-featured version of Vesa's stillness broke into something that looked, unmistakably, like relief given a body at last. The 2 sisters standing on the porch steps where a wounded stranger had once been left with no name and no future, holding onto each other like neither one intended to let go easily again. You did this, Lisette told Bren later, when Vesa had gone to show her sister the trap line, the 2 of them moving across the thawing ice with matching huntress grace that made it plain, for the first time, exactly whose sister she was. Whatever the record says, whatever the council ruled, she told me herself. None of it happens without a stranger deciding a debt marker on a shipping manifest wasn't reason enough to leave her on the ice. She did most of it herself, Bren said. I just didn't put her back outside. That, Lisette said, with a small, knowing smile that reminded him sharply of her sister, appears to have been exactly enough. That evening, with Lisette's ship departed back toward the homeworld and the 2 of them alone again in the last long light of the thaw season, Vesa stood at the window where she'd first opened her eyes to him 3 seasons before, watching the ridge go gold and then gray, and Bren came to stand beside her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. They left me on your porch because no one else would carry what I was, she said quietly, not quite a question. And you carried it anyway, without knowing what it would cost you, before you knew any of the truth beneath it. I carried what was in front of me, Bren said. Turned out to be worth a lot more than a debt marker ever said it was. Vesa turned to look at him, and whatever remained unspoken between them in that moment didn't need translation, in standard or in the old careful language of a clan that had once tried and failed to decide what she was worth. She reached out, and he met her halfway, and the ice outside kept thawing, slow and certain, The way things did out here when they were finally given enough season to change. Iris came out that autumn with a proposal Bryn hadn't expected, though looking back on it he supposed he should have. Havern Station's mediation registry needed a second certified witness registrar to cover the growing traffic of interspecies disputes moving through the relay corridor. Now that word of the Vithra ruling had traveled further than any of them anticipated. Other exiles, other Keithsorn and their equivalents from 3 other systems, quietly reaching out through back channels to ask how, exactly, a formal compact witness account had managed to unmake a clan ruling that everyone had assumed was permanent. Iris said she needed someone who understood both the law and the weight of what it meant to carry a false verdict, someone the people writing in would trust with their story before they trusted the paperwork. She asked Vesa if she'd consider training for the post. Vesa said yes before Bryn had finished translating the question in his own head into what it would mean. More visits to Havern, more seasons on the Reach, a slow, deliberate life built instead of a life merely survived. She began the training that winter, riding the crawler south twice a week, coming back each time with new terminology, new case files, new careful satisfaction visible in the set of her shoulders that had nothing to do with the hunt and everything to do with the particular pride of work chosen rather than assigned. By the following spring, the first letter arrived, forwarded through Havern's registry from a woman 2 systems distant, marked with a designation Bryn didn't recognize but understood immediately anyway, the shape of it unmistakable even in an unfamiliar script. I was told a Keithsorn was given shelter and found her name restored. I do not know if my own marking can be undone. I do not know if it is worth asking. But I did not know who else to write. Vesa read it twice, standing at the same window where she'd first watched a stranger's ship vanish into a storm 3 seasons before, and then she sat down at the small desk Bryn had built her out of packing crates from the relay pad, and began, carefully, to answer it. He watched her from the doorway for a while before he came in out of the cold, watched the particular stillness of her concentration, the frost-pale line of her cheek caught in the lamp's warm light. A woman who had once counted every exit in a room now sitting with her back fully to the door, unguarded, certain in a way she had not been certain of anything the morning he'd cut the ruin dressing away from her ribs, and wondered if she would survive the night. She had arrived with no name and no future, left on a stranger's porch because no one else would carry the weight of her. She left that porch behind her now only to return to it each evening by choice, her name restored, her sister safe, her future no longer anyone's ruling to hand down but entirely, finally, her own to build, one thawing season at a time, on ice that had once nearly killed her, beside the one human who had simply refused to let her be nobody's problem to solve, and who now watched her write the first line of someone else's rescue in a hand that had long since stopped shaking.